Thank you, Heather. Welcome, everybody. I'm very pleased to introduce our panelist today, Dr. Aaron Johnson from the American Institute of Professional Geologists. He recently began there as their Executive Director and is going to tell us about some very successful advising tips that he has been very familiar with in his previous position. And so let's have a conversation about these and make sure you have lots of questions for him. Take it away, please, Aaron.
Thank you, Pranati. My name is Aaron Johnson. I am the Executive Director of AIPG, but prior to being the Executive Director, I spent a little over a decade as a faculty member in both environmental science departments and in a department that has developed a very strong undergraduate geology program at Northwest Missouri State University. So what I'll be bringing to you today will be sort of a summary of the approach that we took at Northwest to build our program into a very strong program, and tie that in somewhat to what I've learned in the short time that I've been with AIPG, so that we can think about how our understanding and relationships with the professional or applied side of geology can help inform the decisions that we make when we think about advising students and trying to maximize the performance of our academic programs. So I thought I'd really start out by talking about sort of the traditional approach, because when I came to Northwest about a decade ago, our approach was very traditional. We had a traditional advising approach, and we used career services mostly to help our students. And I think the career services model works for a lot of majors. It's about how to choose majors and having career days and putting together mock interviews and helping students find internships and those sorts of things. The problem is that it doesn't really fit a geology program. Okay? The issue is that geoscience isn't your typical professional field that we think of. It's not big. It doesn't have a tremendous broad array of employers that often are scattered throughout the country. Instead, it's a small, highly technical field. And so it's really not in the wheelhouse of the traditional sort of career services model. There are a number of other things that really come into play. In most states, geoscience isn't emphasized at the K through 12 level, so students don't even come into the university aware that the geoscience major is an opportunity for any of the career options, unless they happen to be in a location where the mining industry is strong, or they're from a state that has a very strong oil and gas production sector, such as Colorado or Texas or Oklahoma. Internships are difficult. Unlike some of the larger majors, biology majors or business majors, internships are hard to find, and they're more often found by direct interaction than they are through a traditional career services model. If we look at the folks that administer the career services program, in many cases, they just don't have a lot of experience with geosciences, period. And that's one of the struggles that we face, and a little bit of outreach from departments or from industry to the universities can make a big difference. And then finally, unless you're at a really big school, it's difficult for a geoscience professional organization, whether that's at the governmental level or if it's an NGO or if it's in industry. It's really difficult for them to justify coming to your university if they may be able to talk to 6 or 7 or 8 seniors. So the bang for the buck for the entity that's coming to the career services fair is to go to the schools with the biggest programs, and that means that the smaller programs, which is where most of our geoscience students are trained, the smaller programs sort of get left out. So that traditional career services model doesn't fit for most, at least I don't think it fits for most of the geoscience programs in the United States. We also think about academic advising as well, and we think about that as being very traditional at most universities. I mean, the academic advisor works with scheduling. They make certain that the boxes are checked for all the prerequisites. They make certain that all of the subject-related degree requirements are met. Some universities have general education requirements, some have institutional requirements, some have both. Northwest is one that does both general education and institutional requirements. And then there's generally a total hours requirement that's necessary for graduation. So in the traditional sort of academic advising model, the academic advisor helps the student make certain that all those boxes are checked. In some cases, academic advisors will think about strategic course selection. Can we think about courses that will maximize the benefit for a student? Can we take a general education requirement that is particularly appropriate for our major? In some cases, when students are looking at majors and minors, if you have the traditional academic advising model, then what you have is someone that helps you steer you toward that based on what you tell the advisor your particular interest may be. And a lot of times, if you get to know the advisee well, you can think about helping that particular student reach their long-term educational goals. But it's often difficult, especially for faculty, because many of us don't have a lot of professional experience. And in geology anyway, well over 90% of the students that come out of our geology programs are going to go into industry. They're not going to go back into academia, which is what we understood very well. We don't maybe have as much experience and success thinking about what the professional goals are going to be and how to utilize education to reach those professional goals. So what we do with academic advising works pretty well inside the university, but that transition from student to professional is a little more difficult, and often this traditional academic advising model doesn't meet as many of the professional needs as we might expect. So I think we can, maybe most of us agree that this sort of traditional approach to academic advising doesn't really fulfill everything that we might hope for in a geoscience program. Those reasons are varied. Partly it's because departments are small, and in small departments it's difficult to really be able to do all of your academic advising, teach all of the courses you need to teach, publish the papers you need to publish, serve on the committees you need to serve on, and still be able to be a parent, spouse, or just a happy, productive human being. So in a lot of cases, these smaller departments tend to mean that the workload is less distributed. In many cases, because departments are small, the course offerings tend to be staggered, and that creates more scheduling difficulties. So in addition to sort of having to figure out what the prerequisites are, if you're in a small program, it may be that a course is taught every other semester, or even numbered spring or fall semesters only. So it makes that sort of traditional approach a little more difficult. It's more challenging. One of the things that we bumped into a lot at Northwest and at my previous institution, which was out in Virginia, is that the technical requirements, because geology requires students to have a little physics and a little chemistry and a little biology and a fair amount of mathematics, we end up developing conflicts with those courses. And because in many cases the universities, the way the departments are set up, we're kind of set up in silos so that we don't have a lot of interaction. It makes it difficult to figure out how to resolve those conflicts without having to jump through a lot of hurdles or end up maybe inadvertently stepping on some toes because we don't understand or we're not certain why Physics 1 can only be taught at 10 o'clock Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that's a real problem as well. But I think one of our biggest problems is that field camp scheduling is an issue. It's difficult with the traditional advising model to come up with this 4-year plan, and field camp is always the summer semester after your junior year, because you've got staggered courses, you've got small departments, you've got a lot of technical requirements. Oftentimes you have to develop some flexibility in advising, especially since most schools don't offer their own field camp, and you're trying to find a way to get your student to field camp through another institution. So working around that availability means that often the academic advising experience has to be a more intimate partnership between the student and the advisor. You have to work more closely together to make certain that all those things are going to fit. And then when you throw in on top of that the fact that many students have to have that summer to put money in the bank to be able to pay for the next semester of school, it creates another set of requirements. So this academic advisor that meets with you once a semester, if you're lucky, model really probably doesn't fit so well, because you need a little more direct advising and more time to sit and talk about with your student or with your advisees exactly what the future may hold. The last thing that happens with most traditional advising is there's not a lot of really close hand in glove working together to try to think about the transition from the undergraduate realm to the professional realm, or from the graduate school to the professional realm. So trying to find ways to help students as they look for those jobs and make the decisions that are going to make them better suited for employment often are overlooked, in part because of time and in part because we've sort of been trained as faculty to think about career services as being one of those places where the students go. And what we find, at least at Northwest, with a little bit of foreshadowing here, is that it turns out that the faculty members and the connections that we've been able to build over our careers they provide us with a tremendous opportunity to actually help students as they make the choices that are going to lead them into the professional realm. This is sort of what students tell me. When I ask them, and I talk to students now at AIPG, and I ask them quite often about moving from the academic to the professional world, and toward the end, this is how they feel. They finish their degree, and when it comes times to look for a job, their advisors basically say, well, there's not much I can do, and they go to career services, and career services does a lot of things to help, but those things are not geoscience specific, and so it becomes really difficult for the student then to make that transition. So what I want to tell you about today is the way we do things at Northwest Missouri State University. I'm going to say we a lot because I'm still an adjunct faculty member there, and I intend to maintain pretty close ties with Northwest as long as they'll have me. So I want to start at the top down, and then I want to talk specifically about geology. But about 2 years ago, about 3 years ago now, I guess this is 2016, the administration at Northwest decided that the university-wide emphasis is going to be that the student is responsible for their educational success, and that message would be communicated at every level and at every interaction with students as they come into Northwest and as they make their way through the university. We talk about it at convocation. We talk about it in the university seminar course that all of our incoming students take. Our Talent Development Center, which is the place that helps with students that may have different learning styles, but also helps with writing and some of those other sorts of skills that sometimes students need a little assistance with. They model that behavior. Career Services models it. And we actually start modeling that behavior when we target students for recruitment as juniors and seniors in high school. Every time we talk to them, the message is, you're responsible, we're here to help you, but ultimately you are the one who determines whether or not you're successful. My personal model for this is that I think of faculty as academic personal trainers. Our goal, our responsibility is to be Jillian on The Biggest Loser. We're supposed to develop the program and then push you to push yourself. In this case, the university experience is like having a health club membership for your mind. The idea is that if we provide you with the tools and we're the experts and we develop the plan, if you're willing to put in the effort, then you become intellectually and academically fit. And that's sort of the idea that we try to push. We recognize and stress that the students work. I can't help you be smarter if you don't study, and an academic personal trainer or a personal trainer can't help you be stronger if you don't work out. So the benefit that you get from the university is directly proportional to the effort that you put out. And that's sort of the messaging that we see at all levels at Northwest now. And to my understanding, it's actually made a fair amount of difference in the 3 years across the curriculum. But it turns out that at Northwest in the Geosciences, we've been doing that for about 4 years before the university started. The one thing this does is it requires that you have a closer working relationship with your advisees and with your students. And that, in some cases, I think, makes faculty maybe a little less comfortable. We've sort of been trained that the idea is to maintain this professional distance, but we can maintain that professionalism without building that relationship to be so distant that the student feels disconnected. And so what we have to find is that balance between the professional distance and knowing the students well enough to be able to build that working relationship. So at Northwest, we have something we call a Geology Advisory Board. Now, at many institutions, the advisory board is sort of a fundraising board, and they're there to help you find ways to fund scholarships or to take care of the funding needs for your field camp, especially if you have a permanent field base. But this is slightly different. This is a board that's made of alumni, industry reps that may have no connection whatsoever with the university, representatives from government agencies, again, that may have no connection whatsoever with the university, and with members of non-governmental organizations. So folks like Ducks Unlimited are a group that we might work with because they do so much work in habitat restoration. It turns out that a lot of geologists get involved when you start to restore habitat, and a lot of environmental engineers as well. So we want on this advisory board people that can tell us the realities of the field. Now we want our alumni too, because they give us a historical connection and can help us build this institutional knowledge, but ultimately we need a broad cross-section of professionals, because we convene this board to understand what the skills are that our students are going to need as they move forward. And to us at Northwest, that's always been the key, to identify from an advisory board what it is that they're seeing in the field today that students need to be able to do when they step into a role as that geoscientist one or environmental geologist one. What is it that they need when they hit the ground and get their first ever job? It's difficult to support things like this. It costs money. At Northwest, they have a program called the 1905 program. That's 1905 is the year the university was founded. And that program provides funding for outreach. And we've been able to show that this particular type of advisory board allows us to reach out to alumni and to working geologists, and that it's a two-way street. So it's viewed as really a pretty successful mechanism and a great expenditure of the 1905 funds. We meet about every 5 years. That can vary by a year depending on exactly what schedules are like, or if we're able to identify enough representatives early on. So it may be that we meet every 6 years, or that we have it a year early because of scheduling. Maybe a faculty member is going to be on sabbatical. So we try to average every 5 years. What we've learned from our advisory board in the last 2 iterations of this cycle is that our students need more computational skills. And it's not necessarily just calculus. They need more skills with statistics, and we need them to have some of the linear algebra skills, some of those things that will help them if they're doing code, or if they're working with really big data sets, that it's not just statistics anymore that help you work with those large data pools. Our board tells us that they need to write, and they need to write, and they need to write, and then they need to write some more. That writing is a skill that never goes out of style. We've had a lot of our advisory board members tell us that because so much of what happens in the ground and groundwater has to do with things like methyl tert-butyl ether and fuel additives and gasolines and then benzenes and toluenes and xylenes, that every student that takes an organic chemistry course, so they at least speak the lingo a little better, has a big advantage. The emphasis is on water as well, hydrology of all sorts, surface and subsurface, especially if they're able to use basic hydrologic models. Teamwork and team building skills, I think everybody recognizes that. And then the thing that really struck me is that there is an increased emphasis on professional ethics. And I was talking to Dan St. Germain, who is a member of the Executive Committee of AIPG, and Dan really put his finger on it. He said, if I can get to their core values, and it really is about the core values, about understanding what is and isn't ethical behavior in a professional setting, a lot of them, we can either train them or we can get them training courses so that they're ready to step in. So there's a renewed focus on professional ethics. So how does all this play in? Well, first, once we get all this information, what we want to start to do is to take advantage of program flexibility. I think one of the things that strikes me about geoscience programs that I'm aware of at other institutions is that they're actually quite flexible. You have a tremendous number of options when it comes to the general education piece. You have a tremendous number of opportunities for tailoring the elective courses to precisely fit what it is that a student wants to pursue. So those are some of the things that we want to try to do. We also want to identify the student career goals early. The earlier we can get to know those students and get to know our advisees, the sooner we can give them direction, and the more we can expect that they take control of that direction. We also are able to be more honest about the prospects. So if a student tells me that they want to be a volcanologist and they come in as a freshman wanting to be a volcanologist, then we start to be honest about volcanology early. You don't do volcanology in northern Missouri. So those are some of the things that we can talk to them about. And then we want to talk immediately about, are they thinking about graduate school or are they looking to get a job? What is their ultimate goal when they finish that undergraduate degree? And at Northwest, because we're undergraduate only, that simplifies this advising approach a little bit for us. We also direct the students to educate themselves, and we strongly encourage them to. Now, every student's a little different. Some students, as we give them some insight into the resources that are available, they jump in and take off and do these things themselves. Other students need a little more direction. And so this is one of those things where you develop a feel for how often or how well a student's going to be able to self-educate themselves. The other thing that we do, and I stress that this is something that we as a department sat down and decided to emphasize, is that we use the general education as a way to build student skills that are going to help meet what they're going to need to be as geologists. We try to emphasize taking a logic course or a rhetoric course or an ethics course. Those things are all of great value. And so we tend to emphasize a certain suite of courses, ethics, technical writing, a foreign language. We talk to students all the time about geology becoming increasingly global, and that there are certain languages that would give them maybe a little bit of an advantage, especially if they were to pursue that language aggressively and to think about that as a 4-year investment in their ability to relate to other cultures. Because in addition to just the language familiarity, it's the understanding that cultures vary, and it's the cultural literacy that comes with engaging in foreign language study that's every bit as important as simply understanding the language itself. Finance courses are, I think, something that we stress whenever available for students, because in many cases the work that you do with a professional organization or in private industry will involve not only the geologic aspect, but in managing project budgets and understanding the financial aspect or financial impact of the work that you're doing. And then, as I said earlier, a logic course. Those are all things that we deal with. We tell our students to take any opportunity to gain experience, every opportunity, paid versus unpaid, versus walking in the door of the local surveying company and telling them you work for free for a week. We tell them that any opportunity they get to get experience is an opportunity they need to take. And we encourage them to seek out those opportunities on their own. Our experience has been that you can apply for that internship with Rio Tinto through Rio Tinto's website, or if you happen to live in a location where Rio Tinto has a property, you can drive to the property, knock on the door with your resume in hand, and every time you'll get a bigger bang for your buck by showing up than you do by filling out the online application. We call this being gently aggressive, going after the opportunity with a resume in hand, being polite, being well-dressed, being professional, being well-spoken, and having an idea when you walk in the door of what you're trying to accomplish. We tell them to approach local businesses, government organizations. We've actually had students driving down the highway see a work crew on the side of the road doing environmental work or surveying and actually stop and take a minute to talk to the work crew supervisor when they were willing to visit. And those are all things that make a difference when what we have found, and this is just our anecdotal experience, is that when a student takes that initiative and is the person that walks up with a plan, with an idea, with an understanding of what they're trying to be able to accomplish, they have a much better opportunity for success than if they're filling all that information out in some online format. It's nothing against the online format, but I think it's more effective because what we see is that success is about relationships, and building those relationships may start with you seeking somebody out on the side of the highway and asking their opinion. We tell them to learn every skill they can. Every skill you can learn is important. Anything that you can do to make yourself different, to set yourself apart from the next person, is critical. We tell them to take as much math, chemistry, physics, and GIS as they can stomach. Some of them have more success than others. We encourage them to take statistics and linear algebra, or a course at Northwest called Algebraic Structures, which is like a linear algebra light. It's the introduction to linear algebra. We encourage organic chemistry. We actually encourage any material science course that they might get into, because as geologists we understand that in many cases we may be dealing with man-made materials that are part of what we have to study. And then we encourage them to take a coding course of some sort. If they can learn to code, life's going to be a lot better for them. The overall mantra for us is to make yourself distinct, make yourself unique, make yourself different. Do everything you can to build a resume that will stand out, so that when someone looks at your application package, they'll notice that you maybe have taken opportunities that other people haven't taken, or made opportunities for yourself that other people didn't make. We're honest about the workload and the time management expectations. One of the things that I will tell you, and that you probably already know, is that the changes from in the old days, back when I went to school, right after we ate the last dinosaur steak, you had a 5-hour course that had 4 hours of lab every week. Now that's 9 hours a week, and that changed. That changed to 4-hour courses with a 2-hour lab every week, but we still have the same amount of material. And so our courses, they do a lot of work outside of class, and we tell them up front that if you're not willing to put in 10 hours a week in structure, you don't need to be a geologist. It's nothing against you, but this is going to be the reality. If you're in structural, economic geology, or paleo, or SED, you can expect that outside of the classroom you're going to put in 10 hours every week just on that class. So if you have to take structure and paleo together, the workload gets pretty intense pretty quick. Some of the other courses we often see 5 to 6 hours a week outside. Now, the really good thing is, as we talk to students about this, one of the things that we tell them is that learning to manage the workload and expectation now means that when they get hired into the field and they're working the first 65-hour week, they're going to be ready to go because they've already done it. And they've already been able to figure out how to manage the work expectation and balance that with enough downtime that they're able to stay fresh and engaged. I try to talk to my students in particular about time management and attention to detail at every opportunity. We talk about this the first week of the semester in every course that I teach, and then at every advising meeting. And I saw one of the questions that came up here in chat is about advising, and I will tell you that I meet with my advisees 4 times a semester. So I'll give you an idea. I've got some information just to allude to that as well. We'll talk a little bit about the time expectations for advisors. But we talk about time management and attention to detail at every opportunity, because that's going to be the key to success in our program, which is pretty time and labor intensive, and it's also a key to success when you step out into the job market. We emphasize at every opportunity the importance of practical skills, to the point that we incorporate these into our curriculum. Our students, if they take our summer field course, learn to run a total station. In our SED course, our students log core, and they have the neutron activation log, or the, I'm drawing a blank, of course. I am really drawing a blank. But they'll have all the remotely sense logs that go with it. We teach them to use an XRD and XRF. If they take our optical course, they'll actually learn to run the scanning electron microscope. We emphasize GIS, and then we want them to learn the techniques that they may actually employ. So we incorporate all of that into the curriculum. Our classes have this hardcore hands-on sort of segment that hopefully teaches them some of the basic skills that they're going to use. We encourage them to go in the field as often as possible. We live by the mantra that the best geologists are the ones that have seen the most rocks. And we encourage every student to pursue some type of original research. And it doesn't have to be groundbreaking, publishable research for every student, but some type of original research that gives them some insight into how we go about doing science. We also at Northwest allow our students to become student teaching assistants. We don't have grad students, so we get assistants in the laboratory sections from our students. They teach the intro courses with us. They don't teach them standalone. They will teach them with us. They'll help students. They will teach the historical course, and we do have student assistants in our mineralogy, petrology, and sedimentology courses. And what we find is that these students that are willing to take that extra bit of work in return for a very small amount of pay learn a lot by teaching. I think all of us understand, having been in academia, that we learn as much when we teach a course as we did when we took that course however many years ago. When it comes time to leave the baccalaureate degree, we're very honest and straightforward with our students. Not everyone is ready to go to graduate school, and others may think that graduate school isn't for them when in fact they would be a fantastic candidate, and that's where the advisor has a tremendous amount of influence in helping a student select the pathway that's going to best fit their skills and abilities. And if we've gotten to know those students well professionally, then we're better able to assess if they're ready to try to attend graduate school or if they're not. We tell them to start planning for grad school in advance, and we recommend that they apply to 6 schools. They identify 6 programs, one of which is the dream school. If I got in there, I wouldn't be able, that's the best place I can think of. And one that they think of is the sort of the sure thing, this is the school that I know I do really well in, and then sort of 4 solid programs. And we tell them to think about applying to all of them, but we encourage them to contact faculty at those institutions first. Read their research, develop an understanding of what they do, and build a relationship with the faculty member. If the faculty member is not interested, then they're not interested, but sometimes they are, and be ready to ask some really pertinent questions. Ask about things like how funding at that particular program works. Do students get teaching assistantships or research assistantships? What are the metrics that are used to identify the best students coming in the class? You know, is it a competitive setup? We want them to ask those questions. And if they get an on-campus visit, we want them to talk to the students, because the graduate students, of course, have the most insight into a particular program, but especially working with a particular faculty member. The job search, we tell them to start really the beginning of the semester before they graduate. So at least 3 months really works out to be more like 4.5. And we work with them. We also try to be honest. It's pretty common, at least at Northwest, that it takes about 6 months from the time you actually graduate to your first job. If you start 3 months ahead of time, you may spend 9 months looking for work. In geoscience, we find that the most important piece of the job search is the relationships that you've managed to build during your time as a student. That's with alumni that have graduated maybe the year or 2 or 3 before you, or with other alumni through alumni events. Networking is critical. If you get an opportunity to build a network, that's the best thing that you can do. We want them to seek out successful recent graduates, and we actually keep a Facebook page that's just for our alumni so that they can talk to each other, our alumni and our undergrads, and so that there's this constant flow of information back and forth. And it turns out that the social networking sites that help to maintain those relationships are also critical. We've had much more success since we built the Geo Bearcats. That's what we call the page, Geo Bearcats, and Bearcats are mascot. Since we built that Geo Bearcat page, we've seen more success because our students who are getting ready to enter the job market are already able to connect with alumni that maintain a relationship with the department through that site, and then often the alumni, because they've got a little bit of credibility with their particular employer, are often able to recruit through that social networking site, and we find that that's been very successful. We tell our students up front, be willing to take a not so glamorous job. That's not exactly how we put it. That's the nicest way I could think of to put it, but being a Missourian, sometimes we're a little more blunt than that. We emphasize that the first year is critical. To get the first year on the resume is crucial, and that you can survive almost anything for a short period of time. The worst job in the world is still better than no job, and the best time to look for a job is when you already have one. So building the resume and building the skill set is the critical piece of the future. And so we really emphasize to students that be willing to take just about any job. If you're going to be log-in core in central Oklahoma in July in the 100-degree heat, you can survive. And the skills that you gain are going to be critical. So I wanted to maybe give you an idea of exactly how we went about changing our approach and then what some of the results were. So we did a full program review the year that I started at Northwest in 2007. And what we found with our advisory board was that they recommended, one, that we start to take what they called a tough love approach to program completion, which is really what we've been talking about, this idea that you're honest, that you have high expectations, that you put the responsibility for completion on the student, and then you're there to facilitate the completion. And then they told us that we needed to add core logging, economic mineralogy, some total station training. We actually went out and worked with MapTech to bring the Vulcan software package to campus, some field water quality testing, and then a lot of analytical training, and to stress those things in the curriculum. So not just as standalone programs, but to integrate those into the learning environment. What we found after we implemented all of this setup, we had a new review in 2016. So this is really the meat of the whole talk. We started out in 2008. At the end of that review, we had 13 geology majors at a university of 5,800 undergraduates. In 2016, that number was 64. Now, part of that is because between 2008 and 2016, we've seen across the country an increase in the number of students that are pursuing geology majors. But another part of it is that people talk, and students are our best recruiters, and we actively recruit. So as we start to see success and we talk about success and we stress success, what we see is that we've had more and more students come to Northwest declared geology majors when they walked in the door. So our number of majors went up by a factor of 5. Our completion rate went up by 25%. If we looked at the 6-year completion rate in 2008, about half of our students that were geology majors when they came in completed in 6 years. By 2016, that was to just a little bit over 3/4. Our placement rate, the way the university measures it, which is across all placements. So if a geology major got a job working retail at JCPenney's within 6 months of graduation, they're considered placed. That number is pretty high. But we put about 80% of our students to work now using their degrees. And I really believe that a big piece of that is because at every step of the way we talk about being prepared to leave the university and to try to find that job. We use all of that, including the graduate program placement rate, as part of our recruiting package. When we go out and talk to students in the high schools, we talk about our program. We try to bring students with us so that students can talk to high school students and talk to them in a language that they understand, maybe a little more thoroughly than when the 50-year-old dude's talking to them. But we use all of that as a way to recruit students. We talk about the fact that geologists love their jobs, we get to do lots of different things, and our students are successful. So we recruit high school, we recruit the introductory courses, and then we actually, when we see talented students, we make it a point to talk to those students as well. Our freshman to sophomore retention rate's actually really good and has gone up dramatically. We probably would see about a third of our freshmen come in declared geology majors, and then we would recruit maybe another 10. So in any given year, 15, 16, 17 students are going to be coming in as geologists, 5, 6, or 7 of those usually as declared geology majors, and then maybe we recruit another 8 or 9 or 10. Okay. And so what we see is that when we get them as freshmen, whether they're declared or whether we recruit them that fall freshman semester or even the spring, that our freshman to sophomore retention rate in geology is about 90%. So 9 out of about every 10 students that either come in declared or are majors during their freshman year will be back at Northwest their sophomore year. And then what we found as well is that the participation in undergraduate research went up. And partly that's because it's an emphasis for us. Partly that is because we as faculty members, since we have no graduate program to pursue our research agenda, we often have to incorporate undergraduate researchers to help us analyze data and build research programs. But what we find is that that emphasis that we built in starting in 2007 resulted in an increased number of undergraduate research projects to the point that we were able to secure with the chemistry department and with some folks in biology a new program that ran through the Dean of Arts and Sciences office that specifically funds undergraduate research. So I think there certainly are maybe a couple of other factors at play. I honestly believe that sort of nationwide this influx into the geosciences helped us. But I think that when you look at the numbers that we've seen just in this little snapshot, it's more than just we're getting more students. What we see now at Northwest, and I just put in a phone call this morning, there's 71 declared geology majors this fall, and the undergraduate student population is about 5,700. So we have a large program for the size of our institution, and what we saw this fall coming in was they had 9 students come into the university declared geology majors. It's the largest number that they had on record since they started keeping records in 2000. So I don't know how much of that, again, is sort of this nationwide push, and how much of it is the fact that we're beginning to develop a good reputation outside the particular university community. The other thing that I want to brag on, and this is a little bit of a braggadocio, so maybe forgive me, but there's a group in Missouri called the Association of Missouri Geologists, and every year they identify what they consider, or the person they consider to be the top undergraduate geology student in the state of Missouri. That's usually a junior or a senior. And at Northwest, since we changed our approach, see, prior to 2007, a student from Northwest had won this award 3 times since 1971. But since we changed our approach in 2007, one of our students has been identified as the top student in the state in 6 of the 9 years that the award was given. Now, a couple of those awards we shared, in fairness. But I think this probably more than anything else speaks, at least to me, to the success of our program. Not only are our students being recognized, but they're able to go out and complete PhDs, immediately go to work in the field with undergraduate degrees, and are recognized as some of the best students in the state. So from that perspective, what I see is that our approach is not just helping our students be ready, but our approach is being recognized by other geologists throughout the state. And to me, that probably says more about our ability to better prepare our students than anything else that we might have done. Some of our keys: faculty mentoring students. We refer to ourselves not just as advisors, but as mentors, and we make that a priority. That is something that our department actually now gives us credit for, as we come up every year for our promotion and tenure and for our annual evaluations, that we get credit for good advising. We maintain connections with industry and with graduate programs on a regular basis through our advisory board, and then through picking up the phone and making phone calls and talking to people at other institutions. Be honest with the students, because they can smell baloney a mile away. You share the success stories and you use the failures as teachable moments, because a lot of times the kids know and they'll ask you about what happened with student X, and you just have to tell them, here's the deal. And you have to be honest. And then you have to work hard to get departmental support. We couldn't do what we do and invest the time we invest if our department didn't value that along with us. And so we really had to work with the department chair. We're in a unified department. We had to work directly with the department chair and show him, and it is a him in this case, to show him how our approach made a difference for students. And if we can get that buy-in, then we're better off. The challenges, one of the questions I saw earlier in the chat panel was about time, and I will tell you that the time is a challenge. I typically spend 30 minutes with every advisee every 4 weeks. We have 64 undergraduate majors. When I left, I had 31 advisees. So if you do the math, that's 15 hours in a 16-week semester. I'm spending 60 hours advising just the major students, and that doesn't include the university freshman advising that at Northwest they spread among all faculty. So it is a time sink to do it well, and that's where having the department support is absolutely invaluable. You have to build the student confidence as well. Students are skeptical about the workload, especially when we start to talk about the amount of effort that it takes. One of the things that you often see is the student, it almost looks like they switch off. And so you really have to use the success stories to show them that this can be done and that it works. As a 50-year-old male, I don't always relate well to millennials. And so understanding how to relate to today's college student is important. And what I find from my personal experience is honesty is the first step. If you're just honest with them up front and don't try to blow, as they would say, don't blow any smoke, then you're going to be better off. Finding support to bring industry and alumni together to give you feedback on your particular program is critical. What we had to do at Northwest may be very different than what you may need to do at your program, because you have a different alumni base. Maybe you're in a different location where the job market's different within, say, a 6-hour radius of your institution. So I don't think there's any single set of guidelines that are going to fit. Every program's going to be different. And then you have to be willing to change the curriculum. We were, sometimes it was painful. You hate to see your very favorite lab exercise disappear or to feel like you're giving up control, but really what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that the curriculum matches the need, and that what we provide are students that are ready to go to graduate school or ready to go out into the workforce, if that's sort of the emphasis that the student has placed on their educational experience. That's what I have.
Thank you, Aaron, so much for your wonderful presentation. I think people are really excited about what you've had to say. We've had a lot of questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off the discussion. The first question is looking at identifying employment-relevant networking events that are appropriate for your students. How do you advise that faculty go in search of these events?
You know, that is an absolutely outstanding question. So one of the things that we initially emphasized was we wanted to take students to GSA. And when a GSA meeting is nearby, I still think it is an incredibly valuable experience for students, especially those that are interested in graduate. It is more difficult to find industry-related networking opportunities. We do work with, we have a student chapter of AAPG, and we use that AAPG chapter to our advantage. We actually will try to bring in a speaker every year. We also, Northwest has a unique opportunity in that they have a satellite campus in Kansas City. And when the satellite campus in Kansas City has open house events or um, events that are designed to bring the Kansas City area alumni together, it's an hour-and-a-half drive from our campus. And so we encourage students to attend if they live in the area, but we also then will load up a van load of students from the main campus in Maryville and drive them down to Kansas City. So that's where we take advantage of our alumni network. And I think we actually build a tailgate every year at the homecoming event, and we send the call out to all Geo Bearcat alumni to come to the tailgate. And so those are some of the networking events that we build. Identifying standalone events is a little more difficult. AIPG just now started a networking event. This fall was our first student networking event where we actually bring students and members of from industry together, and they get to meet one-on-one. So that is one of the challenges. I expect that there will be more of an emphasis on building those networks in the future, and certainly keep in touch with us at AIPG, because we're going to try to build those networking events first in conjunction with our national meeting, but then in conjunction with our section meetings. And that may be the other place that I would recommend that, and this is sort of this is an absolute shill for AIPG, so please forgive me, but we have 36 sections nationwide. If there's a section of AIPG in your state, those AIPG meetings are open to the public. And so if you can find out when your section is meeting, that's a great opportunity for your students to meet professionals and to get a feel for what the field is like in your area right now.
Now, along that same vein, we had a question about helping colleagues and faculty members that work together to help bolster their non-academic professional networks, and making sure that they are well situated within their own networks to help students connect. Do you have any advice on that type of strategy?
Well, so what we emphasize at Northwest is that we try to maintain a close connection to our alumni long after they leave the institution. So just as an example, one of the people that we keep in touch with, his name's Chad Heitman. He finished in 1997, and he's the Director of Mining Operations for Eagle Materials out of Dallas. Now, what we find is that by just keeping in a little contact, sending an email or checking up on somebody through the Geo Bearcats Facebook page, or if we're at a meeting in Dallas, letting them know we're going to be there and finding a way to just go have dinner. Those alumni often are invested in the program more deeply than I think we would ever realize, and then
Absolutely.
They'll introduce us to other members of their particular organization, and we can build our professional networks that way. I think the other thing to do is to think about the professional organization for you in your area. So we think of GSA as being the professional organization for faculty, and it really is, but there may be other organizations. It could be the National Groundwater Association if you're a hydrogeologist. It could be AIPG if you're a geologist. It could be the Association of Engineering Geologists if that's what helps you with your sort of academic goals, but that'll also help you build the professional network.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, going in a little bit of a different direction, what strategies do you suggest for promoting the importance of hiring geoscientists in organizations where geoscience is actually being done more by engineers, by planners, by spatial scientists, etc.? How do you basically create that job market for geoscientists?
So, full disclosure, my wife she is the refuge manager for 54 national wildlife refuges throughout the West. And one of the things that the Fish and Wildlife Service really struggles with is habitat restoration. And what they've come to realize is that when we talk about multidisciplinary problems, and habitat restoration is one of them, it requires biologists, engineers, geologists, and in many cases chemists working together. So one of the things that, and this is a little bit outside of maybe the focus of this presentation, but one of the things that I would stress is that interdisciplinary problems require interdisciplinary knowledge. It's nothing against engineers, but without an understanding of the geologic constraints, the boundary conditions for the particular project, it's difficult to engineer a great solution. What the Fish and Wildlife Service found, and what my wife and I we've visited about this quite a little bit, is that if you don't understand the boundary conditions when you try to restore the habitat, if the habitat restoration doesn't match the boundary conditions, the habitat restoration doesn't last. And so one of the things that I think we have to stress is that we're really talking about interdisciplinary problems, and we have to stress the role of geosciences in understanding basically the soil and the bedrock upon which those problems are resting and upon which those problems and solutions have to be constructed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, how long after your students graduate do you actually report that placement rate?
We track them, the university tracks them for 6 months, and at the end of the 6 months the university stops tracking. We sort of formally track them for a year, so for a year we continue to send them questionnaires or updates, but in many cases we stay in touch with our students. Well, the very first student that graduated from Northwest after I came just got elected president of the National Association of Land Reclamation Specialists, I think is what it's called. So we try to maintain that connection throughout the time that they're alumni, to the point even that we're developing an alumni survey that will go out about every 5 years, and we'll try to maintain some sort of connection with our alumni in perpetuity.
Now, when you were talking about using social media and social networking sites, can you give us some examples of some of those that you use to keep in touch with your alumni?
Well, it started out with Facebook, of all things. We started a page called GeoBearcats, and it's still sort of the flagship. We started in 2008, and I think we've got 250 some odd members, and we average
That's
a graduating
quite a lot.
Quite a lot. We average a graduating class of about 15 students a year. So we've got students, we've got alumni that have come back to the program. Northwest Geology is in the process of developing what do you call it, a YouTube channel, and the idea there is to do outreach through YouTube. And then the Instagram site, the students themselves built a GeoBearcat Instagram site. So we use those three pretty regularly. Twitter has not really been as good for us as we thought it would be. We tried Twitter, and it turns out that at least at Northwest, the students stay more connected through Facebook and Instagram than probably anything else.